Hi everyone, I'm Matt, and welcome to 10 Minute Story. Today we're diving into one of the most surprising crossovers between natural history and mythology. The strange transformation that may have turned a bulky rhinoceros into a graceful unicorn. Picture this, a massive creature, armored in thick skin, stomping through the jungles of India or Africa, with a single powerful horn on its snout. Now imagine that same creature filtered through the imagination of medieval Europe. Suddenly it becomes an ethereal white horse-like being with a spiraling horn and magical powers. Sounds wild? Well, that's exactly what we're exploring today. How real sightings of animals like the Indian rhino may have fueled centuries of myth-making, until fact and fantasy were nearly impossible to tell apart. Let's begin in the 5th century BCE with a Greek physician and historian named Ctesias of Cnidus. He worked in the Persian court and had access to travelers and traders who brought him exotic tales from the east. In his writings he described a creature called the monoceros, Greek for one horn. Ctesias wrote that this beast lived in India and resembled a wild ass with a single horn about 50 centimeters long, colored white, red and black. He claimed it was so fast and fierce that it could not be captured alive. Sound like a unicorn? Kind of. But when we compare his description to known animals, the Indian rhinoceros fits surprisingly well, especially considering how hard it is to pin down details from second-hand stories. Fast forward to the 1st century CE, Pliny the Elder, the Roman naturalist, collected thousands of facts and stories in his natural history. Among them were several one-horned creatures. He described a beast that fought elephants, had tough hide impervious to arrows, and bore a deadly horn. Again, likely inspired by the Asian rhino. Pliny's texts mixed fact and fiction freely, but they spread widely across the Roman world and influenced centuries of thought. In his account, the unicorn and the rhinoceros were nearly interchangeable. The rhinoceros unicornis, yes, its scientific name literally means one-horned rhinoceros, lives in parts of India and Nepal. It's massive, armored with folds of skin, and sports a single thick horn made of keratin, the same material as our fingernails. Its horn has long been coveted for its supposed medicinal properties, and its fearsome solitary behavior added to its mysterious aura. For travelers from the Mediterranean or medieval Europe, encountering such a creature or just hearing about it could easily set imaginations ablaze. One of the most telling accounts comes from Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant who traveled across Asia in the 13th century. When he reached what is now Sri Lanka, he wrote of seeing a creature called a unicorn, but his description didn't match the elegant beast from tapestries. Instead he described something large, hairy, with a horn on its nose and skin like armor. In other words, a rhino. He seemed disappointed. Clearly the real creature didn't live up to the mythical hype. But his journal helped blur the line even more between the real and the imagined. Meanwhile in the north, another animal added fuel to the unicorn legend, the narwhal. This Arctic whale has a long, spiraling tusk, actually an elongated tooth, that can reach up to 3 meters in length. During the Middle Ages, Viking and Nordic traders brought these tusks into Europe, claiming they were unicorn horns. Since no one had seen the animal it came from, people believed them. These so-called unicorn horns were worth more than their weight in gold. Royal courts bought them to test for poisons, believing they had magical protective properties. In fact, Queen Elizabeth I of England is said to have owned a narwhal horn valued at £10,000, equivalent to millions today. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the unicorn had fully entered Christian symbolism. It was portrayed as a pure, elusive creature that could only be tamed by a virgin. In this context, the unicorn represented chastity, the Virgin Mary, and even Christ himself. Unicorns appeared in bestiaries, medieval zoological books filled with real and mythical animals, and in religious art. The combination of exotic animal parts, old texts, and spiritual symbolism cemented the unicorn's legendary status. One of the most famous examples of unicorn iconography comes from the unicorn tapestries, created in the late 15th century. These lavish artworks, now housed in New York's Cloisters Museum, show a unicorn hunted, captured, and tamed, not by force, but by purity. The tapestries are rich in allegory, blending religious symbolism, courtly love, and fantasy. They help fix the image of the unicorn as a white, graceful creature, far removed from the rhinoceros origins. In the 17th century, the idea of unicorns even made its way into early science. In Magdeburg, Germany, a so-called unicorn fossil was displayed in a museum. It turned out to be a mix of bones from a mammoth, a woolly rhinoceros, and the tusk of a narwhal, all cleverly assembled to resemble a unicorn skeleton. It was a total fabrication, but one that people believed for decades. Even scientists of the time accepted it, showing how powerful and persistent the myth had become. In recent years, paleontologists have studied an extinct creature that adds another layer to this story, Elasmotherium sibericum, sometimes called the Siberian unicorn. This was a gigantic rhino species that lived in the steppes of Eurasia. It stood over 2 meters tall at the shoulder and may have weighed over 4 tons. Most notably, it had a single enormous horn, possibly over a meter long, on its forehead. Originally believed to have died out 200,000 years ago, new evidence suggests it may have survived as recently as 35,000 years ago, overlapping with early human populations. It's possible that oral traditions about this terrifying beast helped lay the groundwork for the unicorn myth. Today, thanks to evolutionary biology and comparative anatomy, we know that rhinoceroses belong to an ancient line of mammals that diverged from horses and tapirs millions of years ago. Some species have 2 horns, like the African black and white rhinos. Others, like the Indian and Javan rhinos, have just 1. No real animal matches the modern idea of the unicorn perfectly, but when you add together narwhal tusks, rhinoceros horns, and centuries of cultural imagination, you get a myth that feels almost real. Even today, the unicorn continues to capture the imagination. It's a staple of fantasy literature, children's stories, and even viral internet culture. From Lisa Frank notebooks to unicorn-themed frappuccinos, it's one of the most marketable mythical creatures in existence. But beneath all the glitter and rainbows lies a fascinating story of misinterpretation, trade, religion, and scientific curiosity. The unicorn myth reminds us how powerful belief can be. Travelers described what they saw, or thought they saw, and their stories evolved with each retelling. Artists, clerics, and traders added their own layers. Over centuries, these layers hardened into legend. And in the end, it didn't matter that no one had ever caught a unicorn. People believed in it because they wanted to. It was a symbol of something more than just biology. It was beauty, mystery, and purity made real. So are unicorns and rhinos the same beast? Not exactly, but they do share a common thread in our collective imagination. The legendary unicorn was shaped by real creatures like the Indian rhino and the narwhal, by ancient texts, religious metaphors, and the human hunger for wonder. The next time you see a glittery unicorn on a notebook or in a fantasy movie, just remember, it might owe its horn to a rhino stomping through the jungles of Assam, or a narwhal swimming under Arctic ice. If this blend of science, myth, and history sparked your curiosity, leave a like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what story you'd love to hear next. 10-minute story. Every day, a new pill of curiosity.